We humans can discriminate about 500,000 auditory tones and several million different colors. But what about odors? Tones and colors vary along a scale, while odors vary in a different space with different intensities, different components, and different mixtures of different components. In a report this week, Andreas Keller and colleagues determined that we can discriminate at least 1 trillion odors. I spoke with him about where this number came from and why it is probably an underestimation.
It's often said that humans can discriminate 10,000 different odors. However, everybody working with odors knows that this number is too low because it's very difficult to find two mixtures that smell the same. So we decided to test in an empirical study how many different mixtures there actually are, and we found that there are over 1 trillion.
Okay, so why has it been so hard to pin down olfactory discrimination, this ability, how many odors people can differentiate?
Olfactory discrimination has been more difficult to study than, for example, color discrimination or sound discrimination, because colors and sounds vary along a single dimension, wavelength and frequency, whereas for odors, there's no dimension known along which they vary.
So you're saying there's a field of molecules for odor, and there's also mixtures of different molecules.
Exactly. So instead of looking at single molecules, we looked at mixtures of molecules and looked at the overlap between two mixtures as a dimension of this odor.
As you mentioned at the beginning, for a long time, the received wisdom has been that there are about 10,000 odors we can discriminate. Where did that number actually come from?
The number of 10,000 discriminable odors comes just from a convenient method or way to talk about odors that was developed in the early 20th century. So people said there are 4 elementary odor qualities: fragrant, caprylic, acidic, and burnt. And then they rated along a scale of 1 to 10 how much like those 4 elementary odors every odor smells. And then the mathematics just results in about 10,000 different odors.
And that was before we knew about, say, odor receptors or, the chemical nature of odor.
Exactly. That was long before we knew about that. Back then, people thought there would be only 4 receptors or a small number of receptors for the elementary odors. Now we know that we have hundreds of different odor receptors.
So in the setup for this study, can you talk a little bit about what participants were actually smelling and how they were able to indicate that they discriminated between two things?
The test we used was a computerized test. So subjects would get 3 bottles with odors in them that were barcoded, and 2 of those bottles had the same odor in it. The third one had a different odor, and the bottles had barcodes, and they were instructed to scan in the one that has the different smell.
And so what did they actually smell like? What kind of odors were they encountering?
The odors they smelled were all mixtures of 10, 20, or 30 different odors, and they were mixtures of odors at the same intensity. So none of the odors in the mixture dominated the smell. So none of them had an easily describable familiar smell.
Really? So if I smelled it, I wouldn't think perfume or gasoline. I would think mysterious?
You would think mysterious.
Okay. So after exposing people to all of these different odor sets, what kinds of trends did you see in the data?
As expected, we saw that people are very good at discriminating those different mixtures from one another. Also, as expected, it's easier when the two mixtures have less overlap, and the more they overlap, the more difficult it gets.
1 trillion odors is what people can now discriminate.
Yes.
How do these numbers compare with auditory and visual discrimination?
So for tones and colors, we know how many tones and colors can be discriminated, and it's much less than the odors that can be discriminated, but it may not be a fair comparison because tones can be combined to chords and colors can be combined to visual sceneries, and we don't know how many of those can be discriminated.
Right. In your article, you actually say that this 1 trillion number is probably a lower bound. Why is the reality probably much greater than that?
In reality, it's probably many more than 1 trillion discriminable odors because in our study, we only used 128 different components, and we only made mixtures of 10, 20, and 30. But there are many, many more odorous molecules out there, and obviously they can be mixed in far greater mixtures than the ones we tried. So the real number is much higher than 1 trillion.
And this has nothing to do with the number of odors we can identify, obviously, if the people in the study couldn't say what they were smelling.
Exactly. We are very bad at identifying odors, and there's probably very, very few that people can identify. And it depends very much on their experience. Perfumers can identify many more odors than regular people.
Okay. What does this mean about our ability to actually smell things? What does it say about our everyday life?
It's obviously not necessary in our life to smell trillions of different odors, and most of those stimuli that we tested, probably no human being has ever smelled before during evolution. So it's not that we need to smell all those odors. But what happened is that our olfactory system evolved to have a very good resolution to discriminate very similar smells, like my baby from my neighbor's baby, milk that's still good from milk that turned bad. So those are very similar smells that only differ in few components. So we evolved to be able to make those discriminations. And as a side effect of that, we can discriminate all those other odors too.
Andreas Keller, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Andreas Keller and colleagues write about odor discrimination in this week's issue.